and commissioners is indispensable for the effective attainment of the objects of the Act and the fight against corruption in public life. And whereas the Act provides for the establishment of a sessional select committee to monitor and review the performance and the functions of the Integrity Commission, B, report to both Houses of Parliament on any matter relating to the performance of the functions of the Integrity Commission, C, review the annual report and any other report of the Commission and submit recommendations in relation thereto to both Houses of Parliament, and D, assess the effectiveness of the Integrity Commission and the appropriateness of its procedures. Be it resolved that the House of Representatives urges Oversight Committee, and B, be it resolved that the Integrity Commission Oversight Committee be convened within 14 days of its establishment so as to undertake the duties as mentioned above and to report to the Parliament before the end of the current session. Mr. Speaker, I propose also to move the following motion. Whereas the Integrity Commission Act came into operation on the 22nd February 2018, and to provide for the establishment of the Integrity Commission of acts of corruption, and recognizing that by commentators and editorials in various media concerning the Integrity Commission and its operations, and whereas certain Section 3 relating to disclosures and public statements which were supported by both sides of the Parliament have been practiced in the functioning of the Commission, and whereas the work are indispensable for the effective attainment of the objects of the Act, which is 61 of the Act provides that there should be a review committee of both Houses of Parliament appointed for that purpose, criticisms and events mentioned and the ensuing controversy be undertaken by a joint select committee of both Houses of Parliament. Establish such a committee on the usual basis. 3, society groups and members of the public generally, and to better achieve the objects of the Act and engender confidence.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that on its deliberation on the motion for exemption brought on the 14th day of May 2019 be adopted.
I ask that the House 350. I ask and answers to questions be taken beyond that time.
Those in favor? Those against? Members, the House is in session. There's a resolution on the floor. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At question time, members opposite last week raised questions. The member from Central St. Mary raised a question asking for details of expenditure undertaken for the NIDS table. I gave answers to questions asked by the member from Southeast. So I propose, Mr. Speaker, to table for the member. The member will see that the expenditure started in 2012 and ended in March 2016. And that expenditure, Mr. Speaker, was done to create posters like this for the National Identification System. This was done between 2012 and 2016. Mr. Speaker.
Order, please.
They created T-shirts, promotional items for the NIDS. It was to pay for consultants, for travel to other countries that had NIDS, that had a national identity. $1 million. US dollars.
Prime Minister is addressing the Speaker. I wish the rest of you to listen.
The Leader of the Opposition in raising questions as well asked whether or not I am aware of the government bringing any bill to Parliament or any submission to Cabinet. And the simple answer, Mr. Speaker, I have the documents here. Yes. I don't have the Cabinet submission, as it would be inappropriate to circulate that, but I could say that yes, the Minister, at the time the Minister of Health, took to Cabinet a submission, and I believe this was in 1995, to start the national identification process with a grant of 200,000 at the time euros for the national identification system. Mr. Speaker, 17 years ago to the date,
Minister Voss,
17 years ago to the date, the Leader of Government Business at the time, which to my recollection would have been the Leader of the Opposition now, brought to Parliament a resolution establishing a joint select committee. Establishing a joint select committee. Hold on. To study a bill entitled An Act to Provide for a System of Compulsory National Registration of Individuals, to provide for the establishment and functions of a body to be known as the National Registration Commission, to oversee the administration of the system of compulsory national registration and connected matters. Mr. Speaker, the committee was comprised of then John Jr., former Minister of Health, the Reverend Ronald Thwaites, who is still with us in the House, Mr. Canute Brown, former Member of Parliament for Trelawney, I recall, Mrs. Doreen for Hanover, Mrs. Doreen Chen, Mr. Lester Henry, and of course, Mr. Speaker, yours truly was part of that committee. I think it's very useful to remind the public and the House of these very important facts. Mr. Speaker, may it please you.
At this time, hold them until go ahead.
Give the answers that you have indicated here. What I notice, however, is that you have not indicated here whether there was any spend in 2011, which is what the question I asked last week. This only indicates 2012 onwards. So I want to know if there was any spend in 2011. One.
On the 29th of December 2011. So so this is giving you from...
No. The NIDS agreement was signed by then Prime Minister Golding in September 2011. You subsequently became Prime Minister, and there was continuity in it. And when Most Honorable Portia Simpson Miller became Prime Minister, the process was continued. There was a grant from the IDB and Korea government for over $670,000, and the and the GOJ was to commit $120,000. Of that amount, was any spent in 2011? Two, you would agree that the significant spend, as you have indicated here, was for preparatory work in advancing in its program. There is, as I see here, conduct of economic assessment, $40,000, development of the NIDS legal framework and draft policy, $91,000, provide technical advice on identity management system, provide procurement of services, services on language translation, feasibility study, etc., etc. And you would agree too, as you did indicate, that a study tour in areas where NIDS was operational was part of the program. So to suggest that 1.2 million US was spent on only T-shirts and other matters, and not indicate
Order, please.
that a significant amount was spent on preparatory work doesn't really wash.
As I said, Mr. Speaker, it's not my intention to prolong the debate. I believe the point that I wanted to make has been made. In response to the member, last week when I indicated the amount spent during the term of the previous government, I indicated that 95,000 US was spent on advertising and promotions, which included the T-shirts and the posters and other things. And I did indicate that an amount in excess of 300,000 US was spent on consultants. I have given you a breakdown, a detailed breakdown, which can be circulated of the expenditure. My effort today is not to, Mr. Speaker, my effort today is not to suggest that there was no value for money spent. My effort today is to make it absolutely clear that the previous administration invested heavily in the NIDS and brought a bill to Parliament which was for the compulsory registration of Jamaica.
Dr. Phillips.
Mr. Speaker,
Let's have some order, please. I cannot hear the member.
Is the Prime Minister, would the Prime Minister say that based upon the evidence, the information that he brought, it is clear that this Parliament and both administrations have wrestled long and hard with the question of a national identification system. Would the Prime Minister also accept that we have always said on this side that we support the idea and the concept of a national identification system? That we have always said that what was needed was a joint intrusion into the constitutional rights of citizens.
Mr. Speaker, just very quickly, my intention, Mr. Speaker, is to bring the country to an understanding that there is Mr. Speaker, my intention is to bring the country to an understanding that it has always been the case that both administrations have attempted to introduce a national identification system. Mr. Speaker, the history of it started with a submission going back as far as 1982 with the Electoral Commission, where the Electoral Commission should have become the agency to oversee the institution of a national identification system, which, Mr. Speaker, was based on biometrics. So, Mr. Speaker, it has taken us now, the leader of the opposition, he made that statement last week. Mr. Speaker, we have been attempting to do this from 1982, and we have not found the collective will as a parliament to do it. Mr. Speaker, to repeat my point, all I'm trying to do is to move Jamaica to that point where we have a modern identification system that can facilitate a digital society.
Mr. Speaker, would the Prime Minister accept that having labored so long and hard together in the Parliament, that simply for the sake of a few more set back the process much further than it would have had to have been?
Mr. Speaker, the leader of the opposition has raised a matter which I have to address. In good faith, I invited the opposition to sit with a select group of the government. We met at Jamaica House, Office of the Prime Minister, and we had what I thought was the oversight of who understood that the body, but the other issue was how would this bill work if it was not mandatory. The leader of the opposition suggested that it should be mandatory, and indeed the bill that was brought by the no opposition previous government had it as mandatory. We in good faith, Mr. Speaker, accepted that. The opposition has to do. The government has to do what the government has to do. It now falls to us as a government to accept the court ruling as it is, and for Jamaica to move forward as a modern society.
Mr. Speaker, it is good that the Prime Minister has agreed to try to comply with the ruling of the courts. But I would not like the record without correction. Because, in fact, we did meet. We did meet. In June, the Prime Minister said he had to go back, he had to go to CARICOM meeting and would be back in touch when he returned. We were told in September, long after the July meeting, that the bill was going to be taken. At no time did we resile from our position that it should be taken to a joint select committee. The bill and the significance of the bill goes far beyond just the party insisted on it. And secondly, what was drafted was a bad bill. And it was a bad bill as manifested in the fact that they had to move over 200 amendments between this chamber and the upper chamber. Haste in this instance did make for waste.
Mr. Statement released by JIS, quoting instruction from the former Prime Minister, Mr. Portia Simpson Miller, as it relates to NIDS. Instruction to read the record.
What is the member reading from? And can we get
March 29th.
Mr. Speaker, you know that's not proper.
No,
you know that's not proper. Can we get a copy of it
on
before
March,
you go?
I give the date.
Mr.
On
Speaker,
March 29th.
Mr. Speaker, two members can't be standing. Can you sit, please?
A point of order?
Yes.
Riffraff, you don't speak to me like that.
Members.
Yes.
Please keep the standard of the party. Please.
All I'm seeking...
I'm going to start calling names. And after that, you know what? Go ahead, please.
All I'm seeking, Mr. Speaker, is to understand what document the member is quoted from, and can we be supplied with a copy of the document?
Mr. Speaker, the member has in Prime Minister the most honorable portion holders agencies to ensure that the national identification system needs becomes a reality this year, the 50th anniversary of Jamaica's independence. Remarks delivered by Prime Minister with response for information, Honorable Sandra Faulkner, on Wednesday, March 28, opening ceremony of a 3-day NIDS seminar at the Terranova Hotel, Kingston. The Prime Minister emphasized the importance of the system and that having the right piece of identification often leads to all kinds of frustrating experience for citizens, especially for the poor. Whether it is in applying for a job, opening a bank account, accessing services, including the services of government, or even registering for an educational opportunity with the accompanying system for verification and authenticity. She noted that even with the voter identification, which for many Jamaicans is the only piece of identification that they have, so that even with my voter identification, there are issues, and we have to commend the EOJ for all the work that they have done. The NIDS, the Prime Minister Portia Simpson stated, is a clear attempt to put right such frustrating experiences which are unique to us. She pointed out in the context of national development, she stated that it will ensure that more citizens have easier, increased opportunities, which will better able them to play a role in the development process. We must make it easier, she stated, for citizens to apply for and renew such facilities as driver's license and filing of income and other tax returns. We must also ensure that the transaction or citizens' conduct are secured. She said that care system of national identification to ensure that it is secure does not compromise matters of national security or the privacy rights of individuals, or is above what Jamaican can afford. Welcoming this seminar as a step in efforts to fast-track the implementation, of the NIDS, much important work has taken place. She used technology to capture data so that the individual's identity can be undisputed and the threat of identity theft eliminated. The NIDS is being funded by the International American Development Bank to the tune of $670,000. Stakeholders in the promulgation and implementation of the system include registered
Mr. Speaker, I would like to read into the records of the Parliament. I am going to tell you, I would like on September 28th to the records of the Parliament. From JIS September 28th.
Can't do it if we present copies. He must supply copies to us before we can quote from this.
Mr. Speaker, I'll ask the class. September 27th,
where
launched
are the copies?
The national identity in possession of the national identification.
Point of order. I was prevented from quoting from this.
Mr. Robinson, members, we're going on vendor of parliamentarians. We're going to read the standing orders. We're going to go by the standing orders. And Mr. Warren to read, and you're not going to cover up your phone with the paper and read the phone. So if you are not prepared to do otherwise, don't do it. Please.
I will print the document and read it in the House, and for the completion of the record, and it will be circulated as per the rule, so that the records of the Parliament can properly reflect what
The member is addressing the speaker. Go ahead.
I am requesting 5 minutes to print the document and ask the marshal to photocopy it and give everybody copies.
We are not going to adjourn for you to do that. However,
I'm not adjourning. Allowed him to read.
If you get it right,
allowed him to read and go on and
members,
nonsense about 2012 when your cabinet from 20. Nobody's arguing about who spend money. You spend money, we spend money.
Have a seat, Mr. Robinson. Have a seat.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
That the member is not permitted. But Mr. Speaker,
I am not able to hear at the level, at the standard we expect. Please.
Remember the Minister of Energy to
Minister Williams.
Thank you. Oral address as Minister of Science, Energy and Andrew Eastern, workers, Councillor, Minister for this opportunity, the heads and staff of the agencies and departments who are also on this journey with me. I am grateful for your support and I'm excited as it has been reinforced that and fuel growth. Science, energy and technology. It is my science portfolio. Mr. Speaker, my vision for this great a nation where our people are confident in the use of science. To have science be the vehicle has been serving Jamaicans in creating wealth, meeting our basic needs. Last year, the Scientific Research Council established the Caribbean in science and technology-based businesses. The center, some of the products these startups produced include energy efficiency and ecotourism support services. For this fiscal year, this Scientific Research Council established a biotechnology division with a focus on quality planting materials. Jamaicans should disease-resistant local crops through the use of nuclear radiation. It's screening for local diseases affecting crops. Mr. Speaker, 100,000 Irish potato microtubers annually. Additionally, the Scientific Research Council and the International Center aimed at improving the resistance profile of the Jamaican ginger. Once it is confirmed, the Scientific Research Council and the International Center feed itself, and by 2050, a mere 31 years away, the world's demand for food, the International Atomic Energy Agency, for its continued financial. That's not all, Mr. Speaker. The Scientific Research Council of coconut plants needed to support the local and regional in the years to come. Partnerships have been established with numerous needs of our society to clients in order of ordnance at your service. Another of our scientific entities in Jamaica, the Minister of Health and Wellness, and all Jamaicans will be installing a multi-purpose gamma irradiator to sterilization of the male mosquito. This sterile insect technique is transmitted diseases. In late 2020, the ministry will sterilize and release into a natural test environment fever, Zika, and chikungunya. And they're also researching to determine draft of the findings for the research relating to cancer and the scientific community. Mr. Speaker, this is finally, Mr. Speaker, on the fact we have to make it rock as